The economic success that we are seeing now coming out of the recession came because of the leadership of the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, and difficult decisions that had to be taken at the top level. And you know, as Minister of National Defense, I'm very proud of the work that our government has done in support of the Canadian Armed Forces, in rebuilding the sense of pride and purpose that has always been there for the men and women in uniform. And I know we have members of the forces here with us tonight, and those who have worn the uniform. But somehow, some way, the Canadian people lost sight of what soldiers did for them. And in addition to the important investments of resources and enabling equipment and support for the bases where they train, where they live, where they raise their families, we have, in my estimation, put greater emphasis on the value that we place in their service. You know, I heard the Governor General's wife, Mrs. Johnson, Sharon Johnson, speak the other day, and she coined a very, I think, a very telling phrase. She said, "Service is love made visible." And there is no greater love than your willingness to lay down your life in service of your country, often in places and in countries far from our shores. And yet that's what our men and women do. That's what our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen and women and special forces do for us without hesitation. And so I certainly take it as a personal responsibility to enable them the greatest chance for mission success, to give them the equipment, the tools that they need to do their job. And in spite of this recession, in spite of difficult economic times, our department is doing okay. Our budget has increased by $5 billion towards that cause of ensuring our military are able to do just that, to complete their mission successfully, to come home to their families, and to come home with a sense that their country appreciates their service. And you know, we're seeing it. The proof of that change in mindset is everywhere. The Red Friday rallies, the yellow ribbons, the sports appreciation nights, and dare I say it, that Highway of Heroes. All of these were generic, grassroots demonstration of not only affection and appreciation, but innate understanding by Canadians of what our military do for us. And we can never go back. We can never allow that impression to ever change. And you know, when we think about the role that Canada played in Afghanistan, Jen mentioned the important role that Canada has played internationally. But in Afghanistan, which has been the most significant mission, combat mission, we have combat veterans in our country now, some of them 19, 20 years old. It's not the image that most have of a veteran, and yet there it is. And they stand on the shoulders of greatness of those that served before them, because they went with the same love and compassion in their hearts to make a difference in the world. And let's look at what was accomplished. We've heard, of course, the tragedy of the loss of life and injury. But what was it for? That's the question that sometimes eludes the CBC and those who covered the mission. Why did they lay down their lives and put everything they had at risk? Somebody said, give me one reason. So girls can go to school. Can you imagine anything as fundamental as that when it comes to the liberty of a country? Afghanistan, under a Taliban terrorist government, forbade a girl from getting an education. There are now millions of girls able to attend schools, schools in some cases built by Canadians, immunized against and inoculated against polio and other crippling illnesses. Women are now not only allowed to walk on the street in their hometown without a burqa, they're able to sit in the Parliament of Afghanistan in greater numbers, percentage-wise, than here in Canada. How's that for progress? We have seen a complete rebuilding of their economy to the days of their agrarian success and prosperity, where they're now growing beets and barley and pomegranate in fields once filled with heroin from poppy. They're growing Saskatchewan wheat in Kandahar province for export, aided by the Dalla Dam, built by SNC-Lavalin and Canadians who helped build that water irrigation system. Again, we don't hear, and there isn't enough connectivity to those successes, all of which happens under the umbrella of security, provided by Canadians and our allies, and now Afghans. And that's the other part of the mission, let's not forget, because we're not done. Our work is not done. We still have almost 1,000 soldiers serving in Afghanistan as we gather here tonight. And what are they doing? They're training up and transferring the skills and the military knowledge that they have to the Afghan security forces, army and police. To do what? To protect those assets, those villages, those people, and do what we've been doing for them. That will be very much part of the lasting legacy of Canada's contributions to Afghanistan. And so that story has been replicated in many parts of the world throughout our country's history. Let's not forget, we had a military before we had a country. We had people serving and defending this land in uniform before Confederation. So our military service runs deep in this part of the country. We had that little scuffle with the Americans about 200 years ago. It turned out okay. We've got along with them ever since. In fact, we've served side by side, shoulder to shoulder with the United States of America in every major conflict since the War of 1812. That's a testament to a country that gets beyond its differences, puts its people first. The fact that we are now living in prosperous North America, sharing the continent with a country that we were once at war with. Other countries look to us with admiration and respect and imitation. And so we've got so much to be proud of. And so much is often overlooked or sometimes forgotten in the pages of history. That's why we put emphasis on history. History matters. You know, bringing back the royal title for the Canadian Forces mattered. I'll share just a personal story. I was sitting on a plane shortly after we made that decision coming back from BC. And this gentleman didn't recognize me, which was fine, was good. I had somebody say to me one time, anybody ever tell you that you look like Peter Mackay? I said, yeah, I get that sometimes. The lady said, must make you mad. But this gentleman was coming back to visit his brother. He was probably in his 70s, and his brother was ill. He was flying back to Halifax. He said, you know, I haven't been back to the Maritimes since I left the Navy in 1972. And he said, I just couldn't stand it anymore. He said, you know, they brought back those forest green garbage bag uniforms. They stripped us of all of our unique rank and insignia. And he said, but you know, I read recently the government is bringing back the Royal Canadian Navy. And they brought back the special insignia for officers, the Navy curl. And he said, I went out and I bought a uniform. Because he said, I never got to wear that distinct uniform of the Royal Canadian Navy. He said, I've been retired now for 30 years. He said, but I'm entitled to wear that uniform. And I feel so proud of that. So these things truly matter. And that's why we've taken steps to remind people daily of the sacrifices of those that wear the uniform. And I've had the unique vantage point as minister to see those changes, how they've come about, and to view how the country has adopted and embraced what our military stands for. And you know, I'm very, very fortunate, and I feel blessed to have spent time at the Department of National Defense, because I've never felt prouder as a Canadian than to visit our forces when they're outside our country and to see firsthand what they're doing to try to replicate so many of the things that we sometimes take for granted here in Canada, where people have had to fight for their liberties, for their human rights, for their basic rights, and Canada is there helping them with no expectation of anything in return. And so we will continue to show that kind of support and that kind of commitment to those who are so committed to our country. And you know, just to close out, because I know the time is short, and unfortunately we do have a vote happening tonight, I feel a same sense of indebtedness to those of you who work so hard around elections and at times like this where we're able to come together, because my concern is if we do not stay in a position to govern this country, much of what has been accomplished can be lost. We can see the effects in many countries around the world of poor fiscal management. We can see the effects daily, even when we look south, what can happen when your economy starts to soften. And we have had a very strong hand on the tiller of our economy and made very important forward-looking decisions that have set our country on the right track. We have as well, in my view, continued Canada's reputation as a caring nation in the world, in supporting those in places like Iran and Haiti who needed our support and continue to need Canada's support. And so we'll give them the best that we can, to the best of our ability, and not always rely on the message that sometimes distorts what it is we're trying to accomplish. Une fois de plus, je vous remercie pour votre dévouement envers les partis conservateurs, votre communauté et le mouvement conservateur dans son ensemble. Ensemble, nous pouvons continuer à réduire les fardeaux fiscaux, à augmenter la liberté et tous les efforts pour augmenter notre partie dans le pays. Alors que l'été approche, nous attendons tout avec impatience et tous les efforts dans le pays pour présenter les politiques actuelles de notre parti. I'm very, very aware of the fact that sometimes the message gets blurred, it gets distorted, but Canadians do see through some of the distortions, and they realize what matters most is a government that's responsive, not a government that is going to get it right on every occasion. That's not human, that's not realistic. And yet at the same time, I think we have made decisions that have ensured that our country will remain the envy of the world. We can't do that without electing Conservatives in every part of the country and ensuring that we continue to see our party representative of every region of the country. We have to keep the party whole. It's not that long ago, and many of you were there through those lean years, when we were a Conservative House divided. And ensuring that we continue to be a party that represents the whole of the country, including Quebec, including the Maritimes,